The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
Hello, this is Dr. Ronnie Floyd, President of the National Day of Prayer Task Force. The Apostle Paul wrote that we should pray without ceasing. Every day should be a day of prayer. As you pray today, would you please remember to pray for our nation and our leaders? We know God hears our prayers, and we pray He will continue to bless and heal our land. A reminder from American Family Radio.
This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
Welcome to a Town Hall Special, sponsored by AFA Action. This is the Hamilton Quarter.
Today is the day to stand up. I'd urge you to call your senator and tell them, listen, we're not playing falling for the okie doke.
Delivering people out of the bondage of mainstream media and the philosophies of this world.
If you run from the bully today, you're going to have to face him another day. I don't know about you, but I'm sick of running.
Here's your host, Abraham Hamilton III.
Good evening. Welcome to this midterm election town hall special here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk, brought to you by AFA Action. We are now 2 weeks, you got me right, 2 weeks away from the midterm elections. I will be joined throughout the program with who is my co-host for today, Walker Wildman, sitting to my left, who is assistant to Tim Wildman, the president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Walker, good evening.
Good to be with you, Abe. I've hosted or guest hosted the show, but never been on with you, so glad to be here.
I'm excited to be here as well. We have a full lineup. We have planned to have multiple guests on the program. Congressman Jim Jordan, who has thrown his hat into the ring for potentially becoming the next Speaker of the House. We have Senate candidate and current Attorney General of Missouri, Josh Hawley, who is planning to join us on today's program. We also have an interview with Congressman Dave Brat from Virginia. We'll have a host of a couple other guests as well. We just want to offer a kind of a temperature-taking moment to urge those who are listening to the program to make sure we don't treat this midterm election cycle like every other midterm election cycle. And Walker has some information to share with you that it's already shaping up to be unlike any other midterm election cycle. Yeah,
Abe, and if folks want to know why to vote, if we can sum it down into about 90 minutes, we're going to do it here, and we're going to really give folks information and educational stuff about why they should vote come November 6th. So this is going to be a cram-packed show, a lot of good guests, as you mentioned, and so hopefully we'll end the show leaving our listeners with encouragement and a reason to vote in November.
Absolutely. Now, you all know Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. I'm going to read those very briefly, and our first guest will be joining us soon, but it says this very simply: You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light so shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. All too often, many people in the wonderful, the greatest experiment in self-governance in the history of the world, all too often there is a segregation between understanding our function as salt and light as believers in Christ and our civic engagement duty, which is a fundamental misunderstanding. The Lord has given us the commission to execute the Great Commission, has given us the responsibility of being salt and light, but He has also granted to us the context that we do that in. The fact that we are American citizens with a nation where the government is of the people, by the people, for the people, includes the fact us letting our light so shine before men requires us to be actively engaged in shaping the government in the nation that we live in. Shaping that government. Now, we are planning to have as the first guest, and I think this is extremely important to do it even this way, because one of the first people to agree to come on to the program when we let the word out that we were going to have this particular show was Congressman Jim Jordan. And him, I'll tell you for me, Walker, and you tell me your reaction to this. When I heard that Congressman Jordan said that should the Republican Party maintain a majority in the House of Representatives, that he would throw his hat into the ring to to become the next Speaker of the House, I have to tell you that excited me.
Yeah. Well, it didn't only excite you, it excited me and many people across the country, because here's what we've been facing among many things, and it's this banner behind me here. If you're watching on Facebook or on afaaction.net website, the banner says "No more excuses." And I think one of the things that we've been so frustrated about, we people who think like we do, Abe, people who think with a biblical worldview, is that we continually send candidates to Washington who pledge to do certain things, and then they get there and don't do them. And so Jim Jordan has provided a fresh opportunity for us to get some things done in Congress, specifically the House of Representatives. So we'll see where that goes.
I think you're absolutely right about that. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I think you're absolutely right about that. And it's one of those situations where the "No More Excuses" banner is 100% correct. Because if people remember, sometimes we become prisoners of the moment. We have recency bias. But if you remember, following President Obama's election to the White House in 2008, immediately that gave rise to the Tea Party movement. If you remember, taxed enough already. The core thrust of the Tea Party movement was opposition to what ultimately became Obamacare. And so you had this consistent refrain that, from a Republican saying that we'll do something about Obamacare if we're able to get a majority of representatives in the House. And what happened in 2012 or 2010 immediately? Republicans got a majority in the House. Then the issue was, Republicans then need to have a majority in the Senate. What happened in the Senate? What happened next? 2014, Republicans got a majority in the Senate. Then the argument was, we need to have the White House. The Republicans got the White House to have all three branches of government, even though it's a slim majority in the Senate, all three branches of government. But nevertheless, we're still at this place where, and I know a lot of people say Obamacare is dead. The fact is, folks, that's not dead. The individual mandate has been zeroed out. There is no tax penalty applied for your failure to maintain insurance coverage. However, that could be resurrected.
Yes, it's on
with the next Congress.
Right.
It can be resurrected with the next Congress.
Yeah, it's a temporary fix. It's a Band-Aid. It is a step in the right direction, doing away with the individual mandate, which Republicans did when they did the tax cuts a little over a year ago. But as you just said, Abe, it's not the full-throated repeal that they promised on the campaign trail. So we'll see where that goes. But we need Republicans, we need conservatives who will repeal and do the things that they said they would do, such as repeal Obamacare. And so that's why voters, it's one thing if candidates don't promise things, if they just don't promise things, and then they get up there and they really don't do much because they didn't promise much. But it's another thing when people promise you that they're going to go to Washington and do certain things, and they get there and don't do what they told you they would do. That's what causes frustration amongst voters.
It absolutely does. And anybody who listens to this program, I'm an equal opportunity truth teller. I'm going to call it like it is. And I have discussed the whole notion of Republicrats. And there are many people, especially among the evangelical community, who are at this place where we're saying, listen, the banner says it all, no more excuses. But I believe we have our guest ready on the line. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm excited to have on the program none other than the congressman from the great state of Ohio, Congressman Jim Jordan. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
My pleasure. Good to be with you all.
Well, this is Abe here. I'm hosting the Hamilton Corner. I'm joined by Walker Wildman.
Hey.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
All right, Walker, good.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. And we wanted to have you on the program first because I believe this midterm election really it can be defined by the fact that you have thrown your hat into the ring to become the next Speaker of the United States House of Representatives should Republicans maintain a majority in the House of Representatives. So the first question I want to ask you for our listeners, why is it that you decided to throw your hat into the ring to become Speaker of the House should the Republicans maintain that?
Well, you're absolutely right. The most important thing is keeping the majority, because if the Democrats get control, they got all kinds of crazy things they want to try to get done that I think are not in the best interest of our nation. But if we do keep the majority, I want to just focus on one simple task, doing what we said we would do. I always say we make the job of being a member of Congress way too complicated. It's pretty basic. What did you campaign on? What did you tell the voters you were going to do? Go do that. And some good things have gotten done in this Congress, but there's a lot that we haven't, like building the border security wall, like reforming welfare, like defunding Planned Parenthood, like replacing Obamacare, things that we still need to get done Those things will never happen if the Democrats take control. But if we do, we got to get focused on making sure that they do happen, and we keep our word with the American people.
Congressman Jordan, this is Walker Wildman here. Glad to have you on.
Hey, Walker.
One question to get into the specifics of what goes on in Congress. Specifically, let's talk about the budget process just briefly here.
Yeah.
Many Americans are tired of this deja vu of every 3 months. The mainstream media talks about how the government's going to shut down, the world's going to end, and people aren't going to get their paychecks, etc. Assuming Republicans keep the majority, you become House Speaker, what are a couple steps that can be done to fix this budget mess that we see going on in Washington?
No, you're exactly right. You have to break the pattern that developed under Obama and then Senate President Harry Reid, where they hold up the National Defense Bill, the Defense Appropriations Bill. They say, we're not going to pass that bill. We're going to hold it up until you give us dollar-for-dollar increase in all the rest of government, all the social welfare spending. And so they use the troops they hold the troops hostage to get more money for everything else. We got to be willing to have the debate and say, you know what? We're going to pass the defense bill, do what our military needs, what our national defense needs are. We need to get those met, make sure those are met, and then say, we're not going to pass anything else until you pass that bill, and break this pattern of growing all of government so that we can fund our military. We were poised to win that battle back in March of this year, because just a few weeks before the big omnibus spending bill, we had sent a short-term bill to the Senate President Chuck Schumer, and he shut the government down on a short-term funding bill, like a 3-week funding bill. And remember, he said amnesty was more important than funding our troops. Over those next few days, the American people said, you're crazy. He quickly changed his mind because he saw what was happening politically, reopened the government. That was the backdrop. Fast forward a few weeks from that, when we did that big omnibus spending bill, we were poised to win this debate. Unfortunately, we just didn't have the courage to have it. Our leadership said, no, let's just do what the swamp always does. Let's just spend more money on everything. So the simple thing that has to change is it's really this basic. We have to have the political will to have the debate, stand firm in the debate, and recognize we have now a guy in the White House who's pretty darn good at conveying a message, and we can win this if we're just willing to actually have the debate and fight.
Congressman Jordan, one more question here. This is Walker. I'm not trying to set you up to fire shots at Republican senators, but I got to ask this question: do you think there's enough will in the House, in the U.S. House of Representatives, by Republicans to try to convince Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other Republicans in the Senate to put up that fight? Because it seems like every time we get to the budget process, the House sends over a decent budget to the Senate.
Yep.
The Senate then destroys it, basically, and let the Democrats run it. Then they send it back to you with an ultimatum: shut down the government or fund our Democrat priorities.
No, you've explained the process exactly, but what has to change so that process doesn't play out that way every single time is you have to get rid of this crazy 60-vote rule in the Senate. We don't have the 60-vote rule for judges and the Supreme Court justices, so we need to change it for appropriation bills as well. And when I say we, the Senate needs to change it. I think largely that 60-vote rule allows people to never have to take as many tough votes as they otherwise would have to take. That's not the goal of Congress. The goal of Congress is to actually get done what we said. So we got to be willing to also have a debate with the Senate and say, you need to get rid of this 60-vote rule. There is nothing in the Constitution that requires 60 votes to get something done in the Senate. And really what it does is it just empowers 9 Democrats right now. They get to control things. And I don't think that's what the American people had in mind when they elected Republicans to control the House, the Senate, and they put President Trump in the White House.
Now, this is Abe back questioning you now, Congressman Jordan. And I want to ask this very simple question because many of the listeners may not be aware of the role that the Speaker of the House of Representatives plays in appointing committee chairman and even setting the legislative agenda in the House of Representatives. So I just want to ask you to articulate for the listeners here, what would a Speaker of the House, Jim Jordan, mean for advancing a legislative agenda that it seems the American people continue to vote for election after election, only to have their elected officials in Washington stop the actual agenda that they voted for from advancing?
No, it's a good question, Abe, and it's a process oriented, so it's not quite as flashy as some of the other things. But in essence, the way it works now is there's a committee called the Steering Committee, which determines which members of Congress get to sit on the various standing committees. So, like, who gets assigned to the Ways and Means Committee, who gets on Energy and Commerce, who gets on Judiciary, and all the different committees. That steering committee is completely controlled by the Speaker. The Speaker has 4 votes. The Majority Leader has 2 votes. The Whip has 2 votes. So the top 3 people, it's a total top-down process. The top 3 people control 8 votes. Those 8 votes determine everything, determine who gets what committee assignment. Those 8 votes as a block also determine, frankly, who are going to be the committee chairman. So one of the simple changes you can make is, if you want a more grassroots-centered approach, after all, every single member represents approximately the same number of people in their respective districts around the country. If you want a more grassroots approach, say the Speaker gets 1 vote. The Majority Leader gets 1 vote. The Whip only gets 1 vote. I mean, that's sort of a fundamental principle in our system, 1 person, 1 vote. And then you disperse power in a more broader grassroots fashion, which, again, I think is consistent with the vision the founders had for how our House of Representatives would operate. The other thing that I would do is, if, in fact, you then select the members of their respective committees, then allow the members on those committees to pick the chairman. After all, they're the experts in that particular area. Let them decide who is best equipped to lead that committee, the Ways and Means Committee, the Energy Committee, the Judiciary Committee, whatever committee. Let them decide. The members of the committee decide, not the leadership, not the steering committee. Let them decide who is best equipped to lead those respective committees. I think then we'll have a much better chance of doing what the voters sent us there to do.
Well said. And I'll add this one last question, and I'll kick it over to Walker for one more. What type of impact and influence can the Speaker of the House have, even weighing in on the Senate Majority Leader? As you said, the Senate has to get rid of the filibuster rule. I mean, this is one of the most ridiculous things imaginable, which it continuously is used by Democrats to outmaneuver Republicans in Congress.
Yeah.
I mean, going all the way back to civil rights legislation in the 50s. You know, the Civil Rights Amendment would have been advanced if the Democrats hadn't finagled with the filibuster rule. What type of influence could the Speaker have on the Senate in trying to make moves in that particular direction?
It's all about the political will and creating enough political pressure. Imagine this. When President Obama was finishing up his term and he nominated Merrick Garland for the Supreme Court, Mitch McConnell, to his credit, said, we're not going to bring it up. We're going to wait and see what happens in the presidential election, let the American people decide who should be the next nominee for the United States Supreme Court based on who they elect as president. It's the right decision, and to his credit, he stuck with it, and we elected President Trump, and he nominated Neil Gorsuch. So imagine when he nominates Neil Gorsuch, if then Senate Majority Leader McConnell would have said, you know what, on second thought, we're going to go back to the 60-vote rule, even for judges. Imagine if he'd have said that. The American people would have went crazy. They said, what, are you crazy? We just had an election over this. Now you're going to let 9 Democrats veto a potential Supreme Court nominee when we just had a presidential election? So it's all about creating the political pressure. The only way you do that is you have to have a national debate. So we have to have a national debate where we say, why should the Democrats in the Senate and the United States Senate hold up the bill that funds our troops, meets our national security needs? Why should they hold that bill up just so they can get more funding for big government, more funding for social welfare programs? Why should that happen? We're supposed to deal with each individual bill. So have that national debate and say, let's see if we can pass this defense bill with just 51 senators supporting it. You have to have that kind of national debate and create that kind of pressure. And the president's been doing some of that. He's been talking about getting rid of this filibuster rule. But we have to have a full engagement. If we do that, excuse me, that's how you win.
Congressman Jordan, one more question here. You yourself, Congressman Mark Meadows, and several other congressmen in the House have been doing great work when it comes to finding out what happened with this whole Russia investigation between the FISA courts, the Clinton campaign, and all the other people involved. Tell our listeners, and I believe we're all going to find out the truth eventually. It's just a matter of time. But tell our listeners what would happen should Nancy Pelosi become the next House Speaker. Will the Russia investigation, will we get to the bottom of this, or will it all be ended?
Well, no. We need to recognize just how wrong it was what the FBI did. Here, the FBI took one party's campaign document. Remember, the Clinton campaign paid the law firm Perkins Coie, who hired Glenn Simpson and Fusion GPS, who went out and hired a foreigner to go talk to Russians to put together a document that was all dressed up, a fraudulent document, a document that was not verified, But that document was all dressed up, made to appear to be legitimate intelligence, taken to the secret court, the FISA court, to get a warrant to go spy on the other party's campaign. They did that. It is never supposed to operate that way in the United States of America. But it did, and they got caught. Thank goodness Donald Trump was elected president, so we now know about the terrible things that were going on there. This is as wrong as it gets. And if you want to know something, just how serious it is, think about this fact. The director of the FBI, James Comey, fired. Deputy Director Andy McCabe lied 3 times under oath, fired. Chief counsel at the FBI, Jim Baker, was demoted and then left the FBI. Lisa Page, FBI counsel, was demoted, then left the FBI. And Peter Strzok, deputy head of counterintelligence, was first demoted, then fired. When have you ever seen that happen at any other federal agency, where the top people demoted and fired? Never happened before. And these weren't just the top people. They were the top people who ran the Clinton investigation and, just as importantly, launched and ran the Russian investigation. So this is as wrong as it gets, and I am bound and determined to get the answers for the American people.
Congressman Jordan, thank you so much for joining us. I know we had a short window of time to have you on, but I appreciate you taking the time to join us for this special, and I think what you said just now will resonate very much so with the listening audience. Have a blessed day, my friend.
You too. Take care. Thanks.
All right. Now, Walker, I don't have any hesitation in saying this, and this is also something that I think can kind of get lost or become a background consideration, that as the listeners are approaching the midterm elections and all across the country, in Texas, for example, early voting has already started. People may not realize when you're voting for our Congress in this midterms, you're also making a decision who is going to be Speaker of the House of Representatives. Yeah. And it's something that may not be a frontal lobe consideration for many people, but I think it needs to be, because in having the possibility of a Speaker Jim Jordan in Congress, that represents a sea change in terms of the way things function in Washington.
Yeah, exactly. He talked about the committee-ships, who heads those up, and folks, the Speaker has a lot of power, and that may be good in certain instances and bad in others. I think Congressman Jim Jordan there is talking about. He's correct in saying that we need to pull away all this power that the Speaker has in running the show on Capitol Hill. So, and another thing is, I've been wanting the House to stand up to the Senate and stop agreeing on these horrible budget deals, because the House will pass good legislation at times. It gets sent over to the Senate, and it either gets put on the shelf to gather dust, or they make some changes to it to make the Democrats happy, and it looks like nothing that the House sent over. So I'm hoping that Jim Jordan, should he become House Speaker, I'm hoping that he'll change the way some of this process works.
And the way he explained it was perfect. And I made this point on my program before, because when you realize behind the scenes how much power the Speaker actually wields, it would get people it would make me, it would burn my britches at a hotter temperature. Yes. Because the point that I made is say, okay, so you have this budgetary bill that's presented. The House passes legislation. It goes to the Senate to die. And then magically, all of a sudden, overnight, out pops Paul Ryan with a 2,000-page plus bill that just magically appeared, Fruit Loops falling from the sky. It's like, no way. This has been a product of shenanigans behind the scenes, and the wool keeps getting pulled over the American people's eyes. But I think Congressman Jordan represents the opportunity to move things in a different direction. Yeah,
I think you're right. And the process you're talking about there is what they call conference. Conference is when the House passes a bill, the Senate passes the same bill, maybe changes it up a little bit, and then Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer go in a room, the four of them go in a room, and they unilaterally decide what's in a bill or not, what the final bill is to be voted on. So that's where the problem is breaking down, and we need Jim Jordan in that process.
Now, speaking of that, we have next on the program, I'm excited to have this gentleman on the program who is the current Attorney General for the state of Missouri. He's also the challenging the current incumbent Democrat Senator in Missouri, Claire McCaskill, for that United States Senate seat. He is none other than Josh Hawley. Josh, thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Oh, did we lose him? Okay, looks like he's calling right back. Well, the next guest that we're planning to have on, and we had him, it seems like it just fell off the line there, is Josh Hawley, who is running against Claire McCaskill in the Senate. And for many Missourians, and I don't know if I'm saying that properly, they're witnessing a new Claire. All of a sudden, she's someone she's never been before.
Yeah. This has been a really interesting campaign season, the midterms here, is because you have these Democrats, and there's 8 of these states where President Trump in 2016, then candidate Trump, won the states versus Hillary Clinton. He won the states by either a few points, some of them he won by a large margin. Well, you have these Democrat senators there, and so they're trying to balance between not making the Trump voters mad and making their Democrat lefty base happy. So it's been interesting to watch, and I think Claire McCaskill has been trying to balance that out behind the scenes and things like that. But we have a lot of good candidates in these states who are running against Democrats, and sometimes conservatives have to settle for less and kind of have a moderate candidate running against the Democrats. But this go-around, Abe, we've had some very good conservative candidates, such as Josh Hawley, who really make a lot of Trump voters very, very excited to vote for.
You know, it's going to be interesting to talk to Josh, because one of the things that came out, and I discussed this on my program here recently, is that thanks to those guys that I just forgot the name of the organization that does the undercover videos. Veritas, Project Veritas. It just revealed that Claire McCaskill had some views that she was willing to laud them in private, but when it came time to discussing her views with the constituency there in Missouri, she had a completely different face. And I think we have Josh Hawley on the line now. Josh, are you there?
I sure am. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is our pleasure. Abe Hamilton here, host of the Hamilton Corner, joined by Walker Wildman, assistant to the president here at American Family Radio. And I know we only have you for a brief moment, but we were just talking about the fact that it seems like Claire McCaskill likes to wear 2 different masks when it comes to Claire in private and in Washington versus Claire in Missouri, in which you would like to represent to the Missouri people. Why did you decide to jump in the race and challenge her?
Well, because I think the future of our country is at stake, and we got to save our country. I mean, that's the bottom line, and that's what this election is about. The stakes are just that high, and control of the U.S. Senate is going to come down to the state of Missouri. And you're absolutely right what you say about Senator McCaskill saying one thing and doing something else, you know, whether that's immigration, border security. She has said that she's against the wall. She's voted against funding for the wall. She's voted against border security, tax cuts, middle-class tax cuts. She voted against the middle-class tax cut. Brett Kavanaugh voted against Justice Kavanaugh, part of that terrible smear. It's a bright, big choice that Missourians have in this election. It
is a bright, big choice. In preparing for this interview, I went back in her voting record. Not only did she vote against Brett Kavanaugh, but she also voted against Neil Gorsuch, which to me showed, wait a minute. Now, everybody knows Neil Gorsuch is qualified, but she was so committed to maintaining her allegiance with the Barack Obama worldview as applied to the Congress that she even voted against Neil Gorsuch at that time. So that, to me, showed me somebody probably is not lockstep with the voting populace in Missouri.
Oh, that is the truth. In fact, that's being even too generous. I mean, she has had 6 chances to vote or support a conservative Supreme Court justice. She's been wrong every single time. She's 0 for 6 when it comes to the Supreme Court. But you know what? She's also batting 0 when it comes to border security. Just like she's batting 0 when it comes to getting rid of regulations on farmers and small business or supporting religious liberty. I mean, she's against all of that. Second Amendment rights. She wants to take them away from law-abiding citizens. That is not what the people of my state want, and the stakes are too high right now in this country to have another party line liberal in the Senate.
Josh, this is Walker Wildman here with Abe. One question, it was caught on video a couple weeks ago by Project Veritas that one of Claire McCaskill's campaign staff members was honestly talking too much on camera, on undercover camera, and he basically said, he was asked by another campaign staffer, does Planned Parenthood give Claire McCaskill money? And the campaign staffer said, well, they do. They just don't give it under Planned Parenthood's name. They funnel it through other organizations. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, it sounds to me like, first of all, you talk about being afraid to share your views and trying to hide them. Senator McCaskill has views on the right-to-life issues that are way out of step with the voters of my state. I mean, this is somebody who is for partial birth abortion, for late-term abortions after the unborn infant can feel pain in the womb, for taxpayer funding of abortion providers. That's her record. I mean, that's stuff that Missourians, they just don't support. So no wonder she's trying to hide it. And just talk about funneling money and concealing your donors. I mean, my gosh, that sounds like you're trying to break the law. I mean, it's crazy. And people want in Missouri, they want somebody who's going to shoot them straight, who is who they say that they are. And that's why Senator McCaskill is going to lose this race.
Now, Josh, and I know you have to get ready to go. This will be my last question. To me, seeing the Brett Kavanaugh saga, seeing the Project Veritas video, seeing this 7,000-plus member, some say caravan, I say invasion, moving upwards from our southern border, the contrast, or should I say the stakes of this election, are pretty plain and obvious to anybody who's paying attention. What would you say to those who may not feel that the midterm election requires their participation by voting?
Oh, I mean, this election is about whether or not we can save our country. It's just that simple. And you know what? The liberals have not heard what we said in 2016. They are not respecting the will of the people. That's what the Kavanaugh hearings, that smear campaign, that's what that was all about. It was about the liberals saying, we don't care how you voted. We don't think elections matter. We're going to try to impose our will. We're going to try to prevent you, American people, from getting what you want on the U.S. Supreme Court. We're going to try to stop a pro-Constitution judge from getting onto that court. And they want to seize power this November, and then they want to undo the results of the 2016 election. They are the party of chaos and the party of weakness, and we cannot have that. We need to rebuild this country. That's what we voted for in 2016. We've got to continue to move forward, and all of that is all on the line this November.
Josh, thank you much for joining us. I know you have to run. Wish you all the best with this midterm election. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. Our pleasure. Now, it's amazing having Josh on and the conversation you mentioned, and I want to dig into some of the numbers in midterm. I know you have some numbers to share with us. Many people are paying attention to witness President Trump had this massive rally in Texas last night where over 100,000 people RSVP'd to show up. Folks, 100,000 people, you're talking about larger crowds in college football stadiums on Saturdays. I mean, this doesn't happen in the political sphere, but it is happening right now. And just some early numbers for Texas, for example, and even had a Facebook commenter during the program to say that she went to early vote today and had to wait over an hour in line to cast an early vote. That's not even election day. Early numbers just returning to us from yesterday where there were 57,000 people in the state of Texas who voted in early voting. Not on election day, early voting. Folks, that is 5 times the normal number for day one of early voting in Texas. More than 5 times. And this rivals the 2016 presidential election turnout. I think people are getting the memo that this election is pretty important.
Yeah, Abe, I think this is we're about to see, I project, we're about to see a political revolution that no pollster or no journalist has a grasp on what's about to happen here. Because what's going on here is you have the many well-respected pollsters. They're using the same old formulas that they've been using the last 50 years to measure voter turnout and things like that, but they're not calculating in what I'm calling the Trump factor. And that is you have many voters who like President Trump, like what he's doing, but they don't want to answer a pollster when they call and or ask them in person, who are you going to vote for in November, Republican or Democrat? And so I think that what I'm calling the Trump effect here is many people are either saying undecided or they're just not answering the pollsters. I think that's why you're seeing Democrats allegedly ahead in certain states, but the Republican early voting turnout. Here's the thing with early voting turnout.
Allegedly ahead in some of the polls.
Yeah, they're appearing to be ahead according to the polls, but I think in reality they're not ahead. So when I say allegedly, that's what I mean. But here's just a couple things. First off, early voting historically favors Democrats. You saw it in 2016. Democrats were ahead in Florida in early voting. They were ahead in Arizona. They were ahead in Pennsylvania. Basically, all the states, the swing states, if you will, Democrats were ahead in early voting before the 2016 elections in November.
And that's not something limited to 2016. That's been pretty consistent.
Yes.
Normally, you have higher numbers of people who support the Democrat Party who participate in early voting. Historically, people who support Republican candidates turn out on Election Day. That's not a rule. That's just something that's an observation that's been made in political history.
Yeah, here are a couple of the numbers. Let's just look at some of these states, some of these pretty tight races here. In Florida, you have Senator Bill Nelson, the current sitting senator, running against Rick Scott, the governor. They're both running to be senator of Florida. Here's the early voting turnout for Florida. 44% of early voters had a Republican affiliation versus 38% who had a Democratic affiliation. So that's a 6-point gap. Republican early voters ahead.
And there also in Florida, you have the gubernatorial race where you have Ron DeSantis, Congressman, Tea Party member, running against self-described socialist Andrew Gillum in Florida. And so contrary to conventional wisdom, you have a larger percentage of people who registered as Republicans turning out to vote in Florida so far in the early voting race, in the early voting statistics, as opposed to Democrat voters.
Yeah, and the list goes on here, and you're right. These numbers could indicate even statewide races as far as turnout goes for Republicans. But listen to this. This is in Indiana, where Democratic Senator Joe Donnelly is facing Republican Mike Braun. Here are the numbers there, even more separated than Florida. 51% of early voters had a Republican affiliation in Indiana compared to 39%. That's a 12-point gap there of early voting turnout. So the list goes on. You have basically, to sum it up for our listeners here, I know this kind of starts to get boring. You talk numbers too much. but to sum it up a little real quick, the only major state that's in play here in Congress and in the Senate, the only major state that the Democrats are leading in early voting is Nevada.
And that's leading with the number of people who the percentage of early voters who are registered with the Democrat Party.
That's right, and turned out and voted in the early vote.
Yes.
But historically, as you mentioned, as I've mentioned, Democrats pretty much have run the table historically in early voting, and so many of the pollsters will say, well, you had a lot of Democrats turn out in early voting, then that's looking good for the Democrats. But what do you say when it's the Republicans turning out more than Democrats in early voting? So I think we're going to see something here in 2 weeks that we probably haven't seen before in a long time.
Now I'm gonna volley this question your way, because this could be taken one of two ways, and I'm not suggesting either way. I just want to present this as a question. Could it be, to take the counter point on this issue, that, well, there are Republicans who are excited to participate in the early voting, but that steam will wear off as the midterm elections carry on? What would you say, putting on your analysis hat for the moment? Or is it the type of situation where these early indicators of people who are identified as Republican voters who are turning out for this midterm election is just an early indication of what is expected to continue throughout the midterm process? Yeah,
that could be the case. And what you're getting at there is you have a lot of Republicans vote early and then not many Republicans vote on Election Day. That could be the case hypothetically, but I think what you're seeing here is I think you're actually seeing more registered Republicans voting than in years past. We may even exceed 2016 voter turnout per state for the presidential election. So that could be the case, but I think there is some factors here that lead me to believe that Republicans are turning out historically in early voting, and they're going to turn out historically on Election Day, because things like this Brett Kavanaugh situation you had a couple weeks ago, that got people really upset. I mean, I even read people online who were saying, I was kind of an independent, or I was a Democrat, and then I saw what the Democrats did to this Brett Kavanaugh guy, and I just went and changed my voter registration. Now I'm a Republican. So I think there are some things here, and then you have this invasion that we're about to see in a couple weeks coming up from South America and Central America and Mexico. So all this added together, I think, makes for an election where you have Republican voter turnout skyrocket both in early voting and on Election Day.
Yeah, prior to the Kavanaugh saga, that's what I call it. It's like one of those soap operas that come on in the midday, the Kavanaugh saga. Prior to the Kavanaugh saga, I think there was a pretty tenuous, not tenuous, there was a pretty pronounced enthusiasm gap between voters who would identify themselves as Democrat voters and Republican voters, because the main source of energy for the Democrat base has been resist President Trump. Not necessarily much on the platform side of things, as opposed to opposing the personality that is Donald John Trump. But when the Kavanaugh saga occurred, and I had callers who called into my program here and say, listen, I've been a lifelong Democrat. Even some who said, I'd never voted before, but because of this, I am going to vote. And I think that was the beginning of enthusiasm increasing among Republican voters, to where you had people literally willing to engage in the politics of personal destruction. I mean, I'm a father. You're a father, and you got some little ones.
Twins coming.
Twins coming on the way. You'll have 3. We have 5. We get together. We have a basketball team.
Hey, we're catching up. We're trying to catch up with you,
Who
Maria.
needs to go up, man? Listen, it's not a race, but hey, it's good on this side of the aisle. But you had that presentation to where, and I think about the fact that this man can't even coach his girls' basketball team anymore without people whispering about him.
Yeah.
That combined with which I think is an overplayed hand, because you think about this caravan or this invasion coming from the south. Who's organizing them using the restroom? You know, how are they eating food? And we've seen videos and photographs of them walking a couple miles or whatever, and then riding in trucks to being transported.
And then food trucks are driving by giving them food.
And food trucks are stopping by.
Yeah.
And we saw in the recent shutdown conversations, American people saying, wait a minute. Even the most compassionate, even Democrat-leaning individuals would say, why would we shut the government down over non-American citizens when we have all of these issues plaguing America's citizens? And so these things, I think, have boiled together to create a potent cocktail of enthusiasm on the Republican side of the ledger. You're listening to this midterm election town hall special. You don't want to miss the remainder of the program.
The 2018 midterms have been called the most important elections in our nation's history. Join Tim Wildman, Fred Jackson, Walker Wildman, and Ed Vitagliano for election night coverage from a Christian worldview, beginning at 7 Central, Tuesday, November 6th. Cast your vote on Election Day, and then listen for results on American Family Radio. Or catch the live stream on AFR.net or the AFR Facebook page. Stay with American Family Radio, Tuesday evening, November 6th, beginning at 7 Central.
I'm Ed Vitagliano. Our society is becoming increasingly polarized. Opinionated people from both ends of the spectrum are clashing verbally and physically. In such a climate, the makeup of our Congress is especially important to assure and preserve a civil society. In this country, we are blessed to be able to vote for our congresspeople. On Election Day, let your voice be heard. Be an informed voter by reading the AFA Action Voter Guide at afaaction.net. That's afaaction.net.
Hello, Americans. I'm Todd Stearns with news and commentary next. I was watching television footage of this army of migrants marching toward the American border the other day. I noticed many of them were wearing designer clothes and shoes and hats, lots of Nike merchandise, shirts from Hollister. I also spotted some pricey backpacks in the crowd. I've never seen so many well-dressed, impoverished people. I say that because there's something about this rapidly growing crowd of people seeking refuge in the United States that just doesn't pass the smell test. President Trump blames the Democrats, says they're behind the advancing army, and it's likely nothing more than a political stunt. There are images of Hondurans burning the American flag, audio of migrants calling President Trump terrible names. Read the stories at toddstearns.com. They wave the Honduran flag, but they burn the American flag. I fear it's not so much a humanitarian crisis as it is an all-out invasion. I'm Todd Stearns.
The Hamilton Corner podcast and 1-minute commentaries are available at afr.net and urbanfamilytalk.com. Back to the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the Hamilton Corner here on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk. I am so excited to have my next guest on the program, who is the incumbent representative for District 7 in Virginia, none other than Congressman Dave Brat, who famously took down Republican Majority Leader Eric Cantor in 2014 and who now is in a very tight race, I guess you would have to describe it that way, running against a Spanberger. I don't know if I pronounced that properly. Abigail Spanberger in Virginia. Congressman Brat, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you for having me on. Hello to everybody out there.
Yes,
family, love you guys.
Absolutely. So the Hamilton Corner listeners are very familiar with my disdain for Republicrats, understanding the distinction between biblical-based conservatism and partisan rancor. And so I want to get right into it. When you are approaching this midterm election, in my view, that the decision before us couldn't be more stark in its contrast. What do you see as the landscape approaching the American people with the decision to be made in the 2018 midterm?
Yeah, well, you put it just right, and it's just not even policy, right? If it was on policy, we would win 90-10, right? If you go on tax cuts and lower price health care, not socialism, and then immigration, right? We got a group coming up, 7,000 people that have commandeered the highways in Mexico, no respect for the law, and they're coming our way. And so if it was just on the policy, we'd win. But the left has just gone all out, right, on resistance, right? So they're running a resistance campaign against our results and a booming economy. And so this is not your normal election. It's not a marginal, is it going to be a little bit of public policy more this way or not? It's going to be the head of financial services will be Maxine Waters, right? The Speaker of the House will be Nancy Pelosi and all that goes with it. They funded my opponent $2.2 million from the Soros back group Resistance, and so that shows you what they're trying to achieve, right? I mean, it's just an incredible contrast.
Now let's just go down the line on some of the issues to just to demonstrate for the American people the differences that are approaching us. You mentioned the now 7,000 strong caravan of folks coming from Honduras up through Guatemala to Mexico with the expressed intention to come to America, many of them holding American flags that they have burned while waving Honduran flags. And we are expected to believe that this poor, disenfranchised group of asylum seekers just randomly organized themselves and all of a sudden were able to make this trek 1,600 miles just in time for the midterm elections. So what is the stark contrast on issues like immigration?
Yeah, well, you mentioned my opponent, Abigail Spanberger, and the Democrats are clever running in Republican districts. They won't even put Democrat on their sign, right? They're trying to fake out the voters. But she's on the record, open borders, right? No upper bound as she's identified whatsoever on how many folks come in. She says everyone's welcome, all that kind of thing. And then on top of that, she is for sanctuary cities. And I don't know if everybody knows what that is exactly. And so she's articulated it by saying she thinks local law enforcement should handle all this, and we don't need federal. Well, the Constitution says that federal law enforcement, ICE, has huge latitude over these areas. So when you say that you don't want the feds in, what you're basically doing is saying don't follow the rule of law, right? We're just going to ignore the law of the land. And so the folks that are coming in, 300 million lethal doses of fentanyl came across the border last year. And then everybody knows the opioid problem we have, and then the human trafficking crisis we have. It's all linked to the border. And instead of deporting the criminals and the gang members, my opponent is in favor of giving them a sanctuary in Virginia. And our governor has already moved in that direction, too, our new Democrat governor. And she's even made remarks defending the gangs in public statements on the record. And so our voters almost can't believe that could be the case. It takes a long, long time to convince them that the left could be that much different than the old, JFK Democrats. JFK did supply-side tax cuts, talked about his Catholic faith in public. He couldn't get elected to anything right now. And that kind of shows you how far off and how far left they've gone.
Now, you mentioned it, and I didn't even get to tell you this, but I'm a former prosecutor in Houston, Texas, Harris County. To state that immigration issues should be handled by local law enforcement really is a deceptive statement because local law enforcement entities have no jurisdiction for immigration issues that have implications on federal law. So it really is a deceptive statement to make. Now, I want to move on to something that's very critically important to my heart, the issue of religious liberty. One of the things that drove many people to the polls during the 2016 presidential election was Hillary Clinton's statement that, well, if you have a well-held set of beliefs that do not comport with public policy, then you will have to change your beliefs, which was a very harrowing statement for many of us. Where do you see the contrast during this midterm election on the issue of religious liberty?
Yeah, well, we haven't done a good enough job getting this out, right? In Virginia, I'm, especially proud. We got Madison and Jefferson here. They were the most proud of their statutes on religious freedom. And we haven't made it clear that we are the party of religious freedom to everybody, and that comes out of the Judeo-Christian tradition. And, we're all equal before God. We're all children of God. And then that leads to, the belief in the freedom of conscience, and then much later on in 2,000 years down the line, it was a hard fight to build that into our Constitution, et cetera. But now the left is deconstructing, right? I got a book out on all this stuff. I taught college economics for 20 years, but the left is deconstructing the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they don't have anything to put in its place in terms of what ethics or what morality or what philosophy. They're just tearing it apart. If you go to, I went to Princeton Seminary, if you go to Harvard or Yale or the higher ed schools, if you bring up religion or your faith in a philosophy brown bag or a public policy forum, you'll get laughed out of the room. And they're also deconstructing the rule of law, right? Go ask any sheriff, police officer, first responder about what's gone on there for the past 10 years. And they're also deconstructing the free market, freedom of business.
Yes.
And this is all intentional. They just want to take over. And if you look, they just want power in Washington, D.C. So they want to grow the government. They want to grow jobs up in the bubble. They want more lobbyists and the crony state. And Republicans want less. We want to bring that power down to the states and localities where the Constitution promised it, right? There's supposedly only 18 enumerated federal powers. And we have separation of powers, federal, state, local, and then across, executive, judicial, legislative. And we've run a Mack truck over that logic that served us so well. And so it's all related, but the attack on religion is the ground foundational piece. Of course, everybody listening to this show knows that.
So true. I've said repeatedly, wherever the flame of religious liberty is extinguished, all liberty is ultimately imperiled, which is why our founders went to such great lengths to put the religious freedom in the first of our freedoms listed in the Bill of Rights. Now, you've mentioned just now the lack of understanding religious liberty, how it ultimately affects fiscal liberty in the business sector. I think there's a huge distinction to be pointed out. President Trump just presided over the passage of the tax cut that we've all enjoyed, and we've now reached levels of unprecedentedly low unemployment rates. I mean, record lows, all-time lows. Where do you see that distinction on the issue of taxation between as we are approaching this midterm election?
Yeah, I mean, this is the easiest one. I taught economics for 20 years, and this is it should be partisan. What did JFK do? He did supply-side tax cuts, and the economy took off, right? JFK said the best way to get the revenues to pay for government is to do tax cuts and be pro-business. And so the Democrats now, that's not what they want. They want total control of power up in D.C. They want to socialize the health care piece. On the health care piece, my opponent has the Bernie plan that is the Medicare for all and Medicare as you know it. That's $32 trillion. That would require you to double the personal and corporate tax rate for everyone in the country. So that's in addition to taking away the tax cuts and raising taxes. So there's $32 trillion. We just did $150 billion tax cut, and it had a huge impact, right? Like you said, the African American women unemployment rates are at their all-time historic low. Never been lower. Business is just booming. 4.2% GDP growth. We got $2,500 back in the pocket of our Virginia middle-class family. $2,500 back in their pocket. And the Democrats are saying, nope, we're going to take that money back from you. If we win, send it right back up to D.C. And so the choice could not be clearer, right? And then Obama jacked up the debt from $10 trillion to $20 trillion. Our tax cuts, if we grow at 3.5 to 4, they're paid for. In order to get 9 Senate Democrat votes, we had to plus up the budget $400 billion in government spending not paid for. You'll never hear that from the mainstream media, right? They only talk about deficits, et cetera, when it comes to our tax cuts. But everybody across my district, they're hiring one more person, right, at their small business. They're buying a pickup truck, buying some capital equipment, right, a new forklift or something. If every firm is doing that, you can see it. The economy is just in a virtuous cycle going up, up, up right now. So we got to keep going forward. And everybody spread the word out to your friends in the faith community, the business community, your social clubs. Get out the vote, no matter where you live. And if you're in my district, go to DaveBrat.com and sign up to help out.
Now, that what you just said is something that I really want to hit on. So all the way back in 1876, then Congressman James Garfield, who would ultimately become president, the 20th president of the United States, he literally said, now more than ever before, now this is in 1876, the people are responsible for the character of their Congress. If that body be reckless and corrupt, it is because the people tolerate ignorance, recklessness, and corruption. But if it be intelligent and pure, it is because the people demand these high qualities from its Congress. And I just want to give you a few more minutes in the time we have left. What would you say to the person who would say, you know, Abe, I'm listening to what you guys are talking about, but it really doesn't make a difference who we vote for or what we do in elections. Why should I be concerned about participating in this midterm election? What would you say to that, Congressman Brat?
Yeah, well, I the day after I won the big contest 4 years ago, there was a huge amnesty bill making its way through Congress. And the day after my election, one congressional district with a bunch of great people, right, who went out to the polls, took down that entire huge liberal amnesty bill that would have passed. It had all the votes to pass it the next day, and it came crashing down because everybody looked over their shoulder and said, hey, the people are not happy with us. And everybody got the memo. And so for those who don't think you can make a difference, we made a difference in the 7th District for the whole country the first day. And then now you got $2,500 back in your pocket. That's real world stuff, right? 100 million Walmart shoppers had record retail sales a month ago. That's kitchen table, real world. That the average family is getting enough money for a new refrigerator, a car fix, a family vacation. This is big stuff that's real, and not to mention the nature of our country. The left is deconstructing what it takes for you to go out and worship freely. And that's it. That's the bottom foundational principle, right? They're deconstructing the authority of the police and sheriffs. They're deconstructing free market pro-business. They won't teach a kid that business is good, morally good, to go out in your vocation and serve God through your work. And we've got to retain all of that to keep America being the special country that it is and always will be. And so just go out to davebrat.com. If you know folks in my district, spread the word.
Now, I'll say this. We're at a place where we just witnessed the saga that was the Judge Kavanaugh hearings. We see Eric Holder coming out and saying, no, when they go low, let's kick them. We see Maxine Waters calling for people to be harassed publicly. We see Ted Cruz and his wife unable to eat in public. We see even news personalities unable to do this. In my view, it appears that the true face of regressivism, which is what I refer to secular progressivism as, is being revealed to the American public. And to me, the midterms present the stark opposition with the reality of what's being presented by these public faces of progressivism and a lurch back to constitutional conservatism, to where the rule of law flourishes, liberty and freedom flourish, and as a result of that liberty and freedom flourishing, free market capitalism is able to grow. Is that an overstatement concerning what's at stake with this midterm? Seems like we might have lost connection with Congressman Brat, but that's okay.
I'm sorry, my phone went for a minute. Your statement was right on the money. That's exactly, if you go around the world, look at every socialist country, they're tanking right now, right? Look at China and India, 2.5 billion people, children of God, finally are feeding themselves for the first time in human history, because they're shedding communism at the economic level, at least, and moving toward free markets. They're still communists at the political level. And we've got to all work on that part. But just look at what freedom can do, not just us, but to the rest of the world. And we need more of it, more freedom for the Chinese to be able to worship freely and the rest of the world to worship freely as well.
That's well said. 30 seconds for this. Some people are presenting this as if this is a referendum on President Trump. Is this about the person of President Trump, or is this more about an agenda that advances the United States of America?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's just, we're up there. He's the president of the United States. So when he pushes tax cuts and we support him on tax cuts, it's great. When he wants a wall and to really do immigration the right way and the Congress backs him up, we can get it done. and everybody's seeing the results in their lives. And so the left wants to spin it, and they've been on him and every other issue all year. And the fact is, American people are better off. Are you better off now? Yes. And that's what they don't want to talk, right? The mainstream fake media will never talk about the economy.
Got to leave it right there. Thank you so much, Congressman Brat.
Thank you. God bless you guys. Thank you.
Our midterm election town hall special will continue after this break, brought to you by AFA Action.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.
Faith, family, freedom. American Family Radio.
You only want to donate to biblically sound organizations. So as a federal or state employee, why not choose the American Family Association Combined Federal Campaign Designation 12037? Of the organizations on the CFC list, AFA is one of the few standing for you and your family. By choosing 12037, you help make it possible for us to continue.
This is American Family Radio, a listener-supported ministry of the American Family Association.
For American Family News on the Hour, I'm Chris Woodward, keeping you informed. That's what AFA Action is doing with the Town Hall Special on American Family Radio, featuring Representatives Jim Jordan of Ohio and Virginia's Dave Brat, as well as U.S. Senate candidate Josh Hawley of Missouri, the current Attorney General of the Show Me State. Jim Jordan says if Republicans keep the House this November, it's important that they keep their word.
If we do keep the majority, I want to just focus on one simple task, doing what we said we would do. I always say we make the job of being a member of Congress way too complicated. It's pretty basic. What did you campaign on? What did you tell the voters you were going to do? Go do that. And some good things have gotten done in this Congress, but there's a lot that we haven't. Like building the border security wall, like reforming welfare, like defunding Planned Parenthood, like replacing Obamacare, things that we still need to get done. Those things will never happen if the Democrats take control. But if we do, we got to get focused on making sure that they do happen and we keep our word with the American people.
Josh Hawley, the Missouri AG running for U.S. Senate against Democrat Claire McCaskill, says the future of America is at stake in this election, and he laid out some of the shortcomings of Senator McCaskill.
I think the future of our country is at stake, and we got to save our country. I mean, that's the bottom line, and that's what this election is about. The stakes are just that high, and control of the U.S. Senate is going to come down to the state of Missouri. And you're absolutely right what you say about Senator McCaskill saying one thing and doing something else, you know, whether that's immigration, border security. She has said that she's against the wall. She's voted against funding for the wall. She's voted against border security, tax cuts, middle-class tax cuts. She voted against the middle-class tax cut. Brett Kavanaugh voted against Justice Kavanaugh, part of that terrible smear. It's a bright, big choice that Missourians have in this election.
McCaskill's campaign says she has spent her career working to improve the lives of all Missourians, and she's delivered real results every step of the way. In other election news this hour, an Indiana pro-family activist is concerned that a Libertarian candidate could siphon off enough votes to help Joe Donnelly hold on to a Senate seat in Indiana. Chad Groening has that story.
Democrats in several key races around the country are benefiting from Libertarian candidates, polling in high enough numbers to take away votes from their Republican opponents. Libertarians have no chance at winning, but are being viewed as spoilers in a number of senatorial, congressional, and gubernatorial races across the country. In the tough Indiana Senate race, Libertarian Lucy Brenton recently polled at 7% in one survey, allowing incumbent Democrat Joe Donnelly to lead Republican challenger Mike Braun 44 to 40%. Micah Clark is executive director of the American Family Association of Indiana.
In this case, in Indiana, the person who's most like Libertarian views would be Mike Braun, and the least likely would be Senator Joe Donnelly, the Democrat. But the spoiler vote, 5 to 7% perhaps, of Libertarian votes, actually works against the conservative and helps elect the liberal.
And Clark says this is a critical race.
This is a hugely important race in terms of Senate confirmation of judges. We barely got Justice Kavanaugh on. A more conservative justice like Amy Barrett probably couldn't get on the court right now.
Clark hopes that voters will come to their senses.
Oftentimes, a couple weeks out before the election, the Libertarian candidate will poll higher in polls than they actually perform on Election Day. I think that's because people, when they get to the voting booth, may realize that they're wasting their vote on a candidate who can't win. And so hopefully that may happen here in Indiana. Every vote's going to count.
I'm Chad Groening.
And a pro-life organization says it's sad and unfortunate to see how theaters have been treating a film about abortionist Kermit Gosnell. Allison Centofonte of Live Action says Gosnell, the trial of America's biggest serial killer, is doing really well, but many theaters have stopped showing the film.
It's been dropped from at least 188 theaters, and so it's raising a lot of questions about why.
Gosnell, the trial of America's biggest serial killer, is rated PG-13. In final news this hour, the national average for a gallon of regular gasoline is $2.84 a gallon. That's down a penny from this time last month, 40 cents more than this day last year.
I'm Ed Vitagliano. A Supreme Court justice has a greater potential for lasting effect on our nation than any other official. Justices are appointed for life, and their rulings may outlive them. The president nominates justices, the Senate confirms them, and this midterm will vote on senators. That's one reason the upcoming elections are so important. On Election Day, let your voice be heard. Be an informed voter by reading the AFA Action Voter Guide at afaaction.net. That's afaaction.net.
Welcome back to a Town Hall Special, sponsored by AFA Action.
Welcome back to this midterm election Town Hall Special. Here on the Hamilton Corner, we are joined in studio by our esteemed president, Tim Wildman. Tim, thank you for joining us this evening.
It's month 10, and I haven't been called esteemed before, so thank you, Abe.
Well, hey.
This year.
You get all kind of goodies when you come
Thank
to the
you, brother.
Corner.
You guys been doing a great job. You've had quite a distinguished panel join you this last hour, right?
Yes. I thought it was important to really try to paint the picture for our listeners to see the contrast that's presented to us in this midterm election process. And many of us have said the 2016 presidential election was a lurching back from the proverbial cliff.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the reality is that 2018 posits the reality as to whether or not the president's agenda that the American people voted for in 2016 will be advanced going forward. Much of what has been done in our nation has been done by the president alone, without the help, much help from Congress. And so this election cycle, where you have the majority in the House of Representatives that hangs in the balance, you have a third of the Senate that is up for election. And so the reality that is presented before the American people is almost like a choose you this day what type of America you want. Do you want to go willingly full throttle into the socialist future of America, or if you want to see what America can be as a constitutional republic once again? And so, I
had a question for you and for Walker, and we talked about this on today's issues this morning. I guess this is political psychology I'm entering into. I don't know how much value it really has. But I do want to ask you this. What do you think the primary objection of the Democrats, other than just being Democrats, they don't like Republicans, or maybe I should say this way, motivation for those who are going to come out and vote in Democrat in protest of President Trump? What is it about his policies you think that's like number one or number two that they're voting against?
Yeah, I don't think it's about his policies at all, quite frankly. I think the public relations arm of the Democrat Party, also known as our mainstream media, has done an effective job of presenting President Trump to the people who are inclined to vote for Democrat candidates, at presenting him as inhumane, as presenting him as racist, and presenting him as mean-spirited. And so the people...
So it's personality driven.
It's personality driven,
and
not policy driven.
A lot of emotion, too.
Yeah, it is. And you think about it, you step back from the political conversation to what our society has become by and large, where we live in this postmodern, relativistic world where truth is no longer a prime value or objective. What is more important is how we feel. You know, the president just released, well, didn't just release, but the New York Times and others got their hands on a memo where the Department of Health and Human Services are floating a rule to define sex and to define gender based on its consistency with biological reality as fixed at birth. And you have people that are going berserk.
Right.
They're saying that President Trump's administration doesn't want to take into consideration how people feel inside. And so here you have the Departments of Health and Human Services, of Labor, of Education, and others that are saying, wait a minute, folks, we can't operate a government based on the subjective individualistic feelings of people all across the country. We have to have a standard for the application of law and rules. But you have people rejecting that because they've elevated feelings over objectionable truth and facts.
Yeah, and I think much of the Democrat base is many of them are the younger generations, and they've been susceptible to buying into the identity politics and the emotional politics of everybody is the victim. So I think.
So if you ask them, give me three things the reason you're voting against President Trump, the first one would probably I don't like him.
Yes.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah. And it seems
that's
like
a reason. It's not necessarily a logical reason for voting for or against a president, but I understand what you're
we're
saying.
in the era of my truth, so having a logical policy-based reason.
Right. You don't like the economy doing better. I would say to them, they would say, "Well, I don't care about the economy. I care about."
They probably
transgendered rights.
It was Obama's economy. So if you leave people who agree with Obama in place, the economy would have been doing the same thing.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, like I said this morning, this wasn't original with me. If President Obama is going to take credit for the economy, then he needs to take credit for the hurricanes. Because he needs to go retro on that too, because he didn't do anything to stop the hurricanes that came to our shores, right? But he did do something about the economy taking off after he leaves office. I got you. Yeah. Anyway, it's going to be, this is, in all seriousness, this is, as you said, Abe, a very critical election cycle. I guess every election cycle we almost say this is the most important. And it's kind of like with sports, the next game is the most important. It almost is. I mean, it is critically important, maybe more so than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago because of what's at stake here. If the Democrats were to take over the House of Representatives, they would gain all the chairmanships to all the committees, and they would start just investigating President Trump and everybody associated with him back to age 2. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's what they would do. It would just create it would be 10 or 12 little Robert Muellers running around. Yep. So I say if the Republicans can just maintain a majority of one and maintain the chairmanships, that will stave off a lot of that. And then with the Senate, I'm very hopeful that the conservatives can pick up 3, 4, 5 Senate seats, therefore allowing the president to choose who he wants to be our next Supreme Court justice, should he get that opportunity, and certainly lower federal judges without having to worry about a 1 or 2 vote margin. Yeah. And Susan Collins, the Alaska lady,
Senator
Lisa Murkowski.
Yeah, her not supporting his nominee.
Yeah, I want to ask you one question, then let Walker jump in because in light of what you said about it seems like you have this repeated notion of each election is the most important election, and you've been doing this a lot longer than I have. Have you ever seen an election where you had people campaigning as out and out socialists? Mm-hmm. Self-described, card-carrying, fully invested socialists as being a viable political alternative to a governing philosophy.
Well, I think Bernie Sanders he went quote mainstream with it in the last and really, quite frankly, he probably won. He got beat by the superdelegates that were rigged by Hillary Clinton.
Meaning won the Democratic primary.
I'm sorry, yes, won the Democratic primary. I don't know if he would beat President Trump or not. I kind of doubt it. But I think that he mainstreamed socialism. Listen, free stuff appeals to a lot of people, okay? And you don't have to explain to those folks how you're going to pay for it because they're not going to. And then you have a lot of liberals who are uppity, who, they operate off. I call them limousine liberals. Mm-hmm. So they want to, they want to say they're for universal health care, for example.
Right.
But they don't necessarily want to pay more taxes for it. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, I think to answer your question, Bernie Sanders would be the one I would credit. I put that in quotes with breaking through and making socialism a topic of national conversation and something that a lot of voters on the Democrat side, at least half of them, that would be a quarter of our electorate, would consider a viable alternative to, say, free market capitalism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another,
that was a good answer, wasn't it?
Very, very good answer.
Thank you. You're welcome.
I'm used to Abe's not used to this. I'm on TI with you every day. I'm used to it.
Okay. Well, Abe just shook his head without any. That's a good answer. Anything like that. So.
Yeah. No. Another aspect of this is there's a lot of things. I know that it seems like Washington is at a standstill, even with Republicans in charge. But there are a lot of good things that Republicans, especially in the House, are doing, and the Senate, with these committee investigations. We've seen the investigation into the FISA warrant applications with the Russia investigation. We've seen Facebook, YouTube, and others have to answer questions about censoring conservatives on national television before these committees. But what we need to understand is if Democrats take control of the House or the Senate or both, I know the Senate's very, very unlikely, but if Democrats take control of the House, all these investigations where that all this stuff has been exposed, all of it goes away. And as you mentioned, the investigations into the Trump Foundation, into Trump's tax records, all that becomes the main focus. And for the next 2 years, that's all you're going to hear about.
Yeah. So folks have got to get to the polls. Mm-hmm. That's the reason we're doing this show.
Yes.
People listening to us have got to get to the polls. And you know what? I challenge you to make sure 5 or 10 people get to the polls because you harass them. Either you call them, you email them, you do both, or you see them at church and you say, "Are you voting Tuesday? You voting Tuesday? You voting Tuesday?"
Yep.
Because it's people often tend to lay off at midterm election cycle and think it's not important because we're not voting for the president this time. But no, it's very important. So I guarantee you the people who are the secular progressives, they're going to get out and they're going to vote. So we have to have Christians get out and vote 2 weeks from today as well.
Now I want to bring Sandy into the conversation. Sandy Rios, Director of Governmental Relations for the American Family Association, is on the line. Sandy, thank you for joining us this evening.
My pleasure. Great to hear you guys talking about this because it's so important.
Yes, and I wanted to invite you to weigh in here because we've had Congressman Jim Jordan on earlier. We've had Josh Hawley in Missouri on. We've had Dave Brat in Virginia on. And from my standpoint, the electoral prospects couldn't be more distinct. The contrast couldn't be more evident. And I've said, based on what is at stake, what we see here, we cannot afford to treat this midterm election as a normal midterm election cycle. What do you think about that, Sandy?
No, you're absolutely right, Abraham. I think the people don't realize how quickly whatever confidence that people have gotten in Trump's policies and what Congress at least hasn't done will be reversed quickly. It'll just all go backwards, whether it's economic gains, whether it's the situation on moral issues, LGBT issues, transgender issues, whether it's religious freedom. The wheels will come off the bus very quickly. And it will be vengeance time, I have to tell you. For all those conservatives that you interviewed tonight, especially the office holders like Dave Brat and Jim Jordan and Mark Meadows and others, their lives will be made miserable. There will be investigations. There will be destruction of their character, at least attempted, much like you saw with Brett Kavanaugh. And we will suffer as a country. There's just no question about it. You know, I often think about this particular time in our country, Abe, as a little bit like we sometimes wonder how this could be so divisive and how people could get so angry. But think of 2 periods of time where it was similar. It was the Revolution, when people were either loyal to the British government or loyal to this brand new American continent. And it divided families, and they fought each other. It was the same thing in the Civil War. It divided families. And I really think that we are at a crossroads where the lines of demarcation are just about as clear as they were then also. So we shouldn't be too surprised. But we have to take up arms and fight for the future of our country.
Sandy,
what kind of arms, Sandy, before you get misquoted by Right Wing Watch?
Well, hopefully, God willing, it won't come to violence. But I think that we are seeing violence on the streets already.
By the left.
And it's by the left. And it is inevitable that there will be bloodshed. You know, Rand Paul said the same thing just last week, and I think he's right. Now, I'm not saying I am not. You're right. I'm not advocating people to arm and go out and fight right now, but I do think we have to be prepared because
fight with your votes and fight with your prayers, right?
Absolutely,
Amen.
absolutely. And if you have to defend, if it comes to violence in the streets, you have to be prepared to fight on that, to defend your families as well.
Sandy,
I don't think we're there yet, but, we have to be prepared.
Sandy, this is Walker here, and I know at times many of us get discouraged about what's going on in Washington, and, we wish the Republicans would do more on legislative items and things like that. But wouldn't you say that we're running a marathon, if you will, that this is a long-term fight to take it back Washington, not with just Republicans, but conservatives?
Absolutely. And, the good news is there's a potential certainly in the Senate to pick up at least 4 very strong conservative senators. Now, one of them is Josh Hawley that you interviewed earlier this evening. And that could change the Senate. That could revolutionize the Senate, really, because we don't have that many conservatives. Most of them are just squishy moderates. At least they were until Kavanaugh hearing. They might have moved to the right a little bit since then. We hope so. In the House, who knows? I'm watching all of these predictions today. I know that the Democrats need 23 seats to flip the House. The Cook report is saying today that there are 72 Republican seats at risk. Part of that's because 41 Republicans have stepped aside or just not run again. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of seats are open. There's not name recognition. And so it's very possible that, in fact, people are saying it's likely that the Republicans will lose the House. But you know what? There's some good news today, some interesting, at least I'll mention one thing. Keith Ellison, this is not a House race or a governor's race. It's a Attorney General's race in Minnesota. Keith Ellison, who is the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, whose girlfriend accused him of harassment, sexual abuse, whatever you want to call it, and that's been in the news. He has moved behind in the polls, behind Doug Wardlow by 7 points.
Yeah.
As of just today.
Yeah.
Now that's huge.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And that's Minnesota.
Yeah, that's a 14-point flip because he was up by 7 points not too long ago, and so now he's been projected as being down 7 points. And in Minnesota, as you stated, that's Al Franken country. Mm-hmm. you know?
Exactly. And so that's kind of all right, that's a pulse taking. That doesn't mean anything definitively. It just means that is Minnesota, left of the left. And Keith Ellison, who's been their darling, is behind by 7 points. That's to an unknown candidate, really. Doug Wardlow is, I think, by voters, he's known by less than 50% of Republican voters in terms of name ID. So there is something afoot, but of course, in these suburban districts, in these major cities, we all know that they tend to be much more liberal than the redder parts of all the states. And that's where a ton of these House seats are up for grabs. So there's just no way to know. We also have, you may have talked about, we've got 3 different House seats that are being challenged by 3 different women who were, 2 of them were CIA operatives and one of them was Air Force intelligence. They're all George Soros supported. One is running against Will Hurd in Texas. One is running against Dave Brat, Abigail Spanberger in District 7 of Virginia, and the third is running in Michigan. And she is, by the way, if I could find her name, and I don't think I can because I left my office, she is the one who had a big part in pinning the Iran deal, that terrible, horrible deal when she was with the CIA. She's running against the candidate in Michigan, who is a conservative Republican. So there's all kinds of interesting things happening.
Yeah.
They're also, all those 3 women candidates are being supported by George Soros' Act Blue and a couple of other extremely left fundraising sources.
Hey, Sandy, did you say 40 Republicans who are in the House now are just not running again?
41 open seats. Some of them retired, and some of them decided not to run again.
But Republicans
41?
only. Republicans only. 41.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Wow, that's I don't know if that's unusual or not. It seems to me it probably would be.
That is unusual.
It is.
Yeah. That is very unusual.
But, well, the good news is, Tim, that a lot of from my perspective, a lot of those people that decided not to run again were liberal Republicans. that fought against the president's agenda. And so if the Republicans should prevail in the House, that would mean that there is a much better chance of a new set of Republicans being moved to the right than those that had hunkered down and decided their position a long time ago.
That's a big unknown right there. Those 41 that you're talking about. So, that's why we really don't know. That's why it's hard to trust these polls exactly, because you just don't know. Well, when you have a race that's a Republican district, and then you have an unknown, a new Republican versus a Democrat. So, that's very interesting. I want to ask you, Sandy. I asked Walker and Abe earlier. What do you think the number one or top two reasons, policy reasons, that that are driving the Democrats, the Democratic vote this time? Well, what are they fired up about?
Yeah. Well, I think the first one is Donald Trump. This vitriolic,
the personality,
crazy. Not just that, Tim. It's that he, as much as they complain about his personality, they hate the fact that probably 90% of the time he comes down for conservative principles, whether it's on economics or whether it's on moral issues
Judges.
or the issue of life. They fear that the gains. They said as much. Barack Obama said as much yesterday Monday in an appearance. They fear that all of their gains will be reversed, and they see President Trump as someone who's championing the cause of conservatives in the country. And they hate conservative values. It threatens what they perceive as their freedom. Freedom to them means license, the freedom to do whatever they want to, often sexually, and without condemnation. And so they don't want any of that reversed. So I think that's the number one thing driving them. I think the number two thing driving them is health care. I think that's probably legitimate. Those polling of Democratic voters, because
they want more than.
It's not the Republicans' fault they're in that shape.
Yeah, they want more than Obamacare. You mean they want universal health care, like socialized medicine, full blown? You mean?
Well, yes, and I think the premiums for Obamacare shot up, and they're not getting great health care because that's what was. The foundation was laid under Obamacare.
But why would they be mad? Why would they be mad at Trump over the failure of Obamacare?
Because they don't pay attention and they don't really know whose fault it is. People it's like if the economy is good, they vote for the person that's in office, and if it's bad, they vote against them because they don't really think critically. They don't pay attention. They don't know.
And Sandy, to your point, I mean, it was even discussed amongst the framers of Obamacare that we need to first get Obamacare, and knowing it's going to fail, it cannot stand on itself financially. Let's first get Obamacare. It will inevitably fail, and then after that comes full-blown socialized medicine. So to your point, Dad, and to the question that Sandy was trying to answer there is, it could be that these Democrat voters, they're energized because they want full-blown socialized health care because Obamacare wasn't enough.
Let me also credit President Trump for just a minute for one more thing, and that is his level of commitment to getting out in the country and trying to rally the voters to elect people that will help him. He has been a tireless warrior for the cause, traveling all over the country almost 2 or 3 times a week, seems like.
He seems to enjoy it. Seems to enjoy it thoroughly.
I don't know how many red ties he has. I wonder if that's just one red tie. But I kind of doubt it. But anyway, he has. You got to give him credit for. He hadn't rested on his laurels and sat in the White House and said, "Hey."
He did that during his campaign, and it's a continuation of that.
But he's doing it for others now. Of course, he's doing it to help himself too. But still, a credit to him on that.
Well, folks, the main desire through this particular special is to encourage you to vote. Congressman Jim Jordan said that one of the biggest differences between him being a Speaker of the House of Representatives and previous Speakers of the House is that he would be willing to make the arguments, make the case to the American people, instead of folding and capitulating when conservative principles are pit against socialistic principles in the public eye. to stand and make the case. And so as we go to the polls, that should be in view. The fact that we have the opportunity now to determine whether or not we're going to have the type of Congress going forward that will be willing to make the case to the American people. A lot of the people considered Ronald Reagan a genius for that very fact, not only maintaining his commitment to conservative principles, but making the case directly to the American people. We're living in a moment where we have the opportunity to elect people to do the very same thing. I want to thank Walker for joining me this evening, the co-host. Sandy, thank you so much for coming on to the program. Tim, we appreciate
very welcome
you joining us. And I would like to just pray very briefly for our country and for the midterms. Lord, we thank you for who you are and for what you have done in our country. We ask that you would lead us and guide us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. And AFAaction.net, Abe, if folks are going to the ballot box come November, just in a couple weeks here, and they want to know where their candidates stand on certain issues, AFAaction.net has a voter guide, a very well-informed voter guide there where folks can read about the candidates.
That is absolutely right. I encourage everybody listening to not only vote, but be an informed voter. Take people, as President Tim said, take 4 or 5 people with you to make sure they vote as well, and go to AFAaction.net, AFAaction.net, where the iVoter Guide is made available for you to inform you and your constituency. So you can always check back to AFAaction.net for all things political engagement. All things political engagement. This is a great time to be alive. As I say all the time in the catchphrase, darkness is not an affirmative force. It is merely the absence of light. We're in a precious moment in this time. Don't miss your moment. Thank you for joining us on the program. God bless you. Have a great night.